The ocean sparkled like diamonds that morning, but Victoria Hale didn't see beauty. She saw posse. From the terrace of her penthouse in Miami, she watched smoke rising from a mansion across the bay. Hers. The flames danced, reflecting on her golden necklace like a curse she herself had created. A helicopter hovered in the air. Reporters shouted her name. She didn't move, because somewhere within that fire, their secrets were burning too. But behind all the gold, the narrator whispers, there's always a debt that money can't pay. The dry sound of a glass breaking, break the silence. She turns her back on the chaos, her gaze as cold as marble. His empire had not yet fallen, but the first crack had already begun. Every fortune has a moment when silence costs more than the truth. Victoria Hale was the untouchable queen of Miami, a real estate mogul, investor, and collector of enemies. They called her the Golden Widow, although no one dared to ask why. Its penthouse gleamed under the Florida sun, filled with million-dollar works of art and even more valuable secrets. And if you think you've heard stories like this before, you're mistaken, because this isn't just a story about wealth. It's about how far can greed go before it destroys everything. Dramatic pause. Every fortune hides a shadow, and Victoria's, it was darker than anyone could have imagined. If you enjoy stories about hidden fortunes, betrayals, and the price of power, stay until the end. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, because this is just the beginning. And believe me, you'll want to see her empire burn. Miami, 10 years before the fire. Victoria Hale wasn't born rich, but she learned early on that charm could be more valuable than money. She worked as a real estate agent in a seaside office, selling dreams she herself couldn't afford. One day, I won't sell houses. I'll own them all, she said, with a smile that mixed sweetness and menace. And in that city where luxury is religion, she was about to become a goddess. His first stroke of luck, or of calculation, came with a man named Richard Marlowe, a veteran investor who owned half the buildings that dotted the Miami skyline. Victoria charmed him with her intelligence and ambition disguised as innocence. Together, they created Hale and Marlowe Properties, a company that grew too fast to be honest. Rumors said the money came from tax havens, others that it was from something even more sinister. She simply smiled and clinked glasses of champagne, as if every whisper was music to her ears. Time has transformed his office into a fortress of glass and steel. Employees feared her, partners envied her, and the city revered her. She controlled everything: contracts, licenses, silences, and the more power he gained, the less emotion remained in his eyes. Victoria didn't want love. She wanted legacy, but too much power attracts dangerous eyes. A fired broker started spreading stories about fake accounts and hidden documents. An investigative journalist began to follow her discreetly, and on a rainy night, as thunder roared over the bay, Victoria signed a contract that would change everything. A contract that in the end would cost her more than she imagined. Narrative pause. She believed she had won the game. But what she didn't know was that the game had only just begun. The following years transformed Victoria Hale into a living legend. Her company now controlled half of Miami's luxury properties. Yachts, penthouses, and resorts passed through her hands like cards in a game she always seemed to win. She dominated the city with the elegance of someone who knew how to conceal her own venom. Her parties were legendary. Musicians, politicians, businessmen, and heirs vied for the privilege of being seen by her side. High up in the Hale mansion, the champagne never stopped bubbling. Smiles sparkled, but glances often carried hidden meanings. In Miami, she would say, trust is the most valuable currency. Amidst toasts and contracts, one name always came up in hushed tones: Richard Marlowe. The man who had been her partner, her mentor, and perhaps for a time something more. until he disappeared. Some said he'd run off with the money, others that someone had silenced him. Victoria would simply smile and change the subject with a look that froze any curiosity. She learned to control rumors with the same talent with which she controlled the market. She bought newspapers, silenced columns, and donated to political campaigns. Everything had a price, even the truth, and the more power she accumulated, the further she became from the woman who had once believed in love. Now she believed only in control. But on one of the office walls, behind a smoked glass panel, there was a safe that few knew existed. Inside, contracts signed under false names, a red pen drive, and a voice recording dated before Richard's disappearance. Every morning, Victoria would look at that safe and take a deep breath. One night, as she opened her bedroom window, she saw a drone hovering over her penthouse. Lights flashed in the darkness, and for a moment, she felt her heart race. The next day, nothing was reported, but a black envelope appeared on her desk. No return address, no words, just a photograph, her and Richard, together on the night he disappeared. The metallic click of the safe sounded different that night. She opened it with trembling hands and retrieved the flash drive. The video showed a recorded conversation, distorted voices, illegal promises, a clause that could destroy everything. "Delete this," Richard said, "or we'll end up dead." She paused the video, looked out the window, and smiled. "Some truths," he murmured, "need to be bought with silence." And in the reflection of the glass, he saw not the woman who had won, but the one who was beginning to be devoured by her own greed. The video was short but devastating. It showed Richard Marlowe negotiating a hidden clause that redirected part of the company's fortune to an offshore account in his name and Victoria's name. But there was something more, an additional recording, dated the day before his death, with the voice of a lawyer mentioning a secret will. Victoria stood motionless before the screen. That document could destroy years of empire, power, and status. If it came to light, it would reveal that Hale and Marlowe's fortune had been built on fraud and corruption. She took a deep breath, opened a bottle of wine, and watched the reflection of the fire in the glass. "Everything that is mine," she whispered, "will never be taken away." The following morning, a news story exploded across the portals. Marlowe family reopens investigation into patriarch's disappearance. Victoria's name surfaced amidst suspicion. No direct proof, only insinuations. But what was destroying her wasn't what they were saying, but what she knew to be true. The past had returned. In her glass office, the ticking of the clock was louder than usual. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second seemed a reminder that the time of impunity was running out. She called her lawyer, Mason Clark, and demanded he locate the will. He hesitated. "Victoria, maybe it's best to leave it buried." She replied with a look that chilled the air. 3 days later, Mason returned with an old envelope, sealed in red wax. On it was the seal of the Marlowe Foundation, Richard's original will. Victoria opened it carefully, her hands steady despite her racing heart. The document left 70% of the company's shares to Richard's sister, in case evidence of fraud were discovered. The paper slipped slowly from her hands. She closed her eyes, trying to contain her anger. Each line was a death sentence for her empire. "He knew," she murmured. "He knew from the beginning." The echo of her voice resonated through the walls like a warning. In that instant, Victoria understood. The fortune she had built was not hers. It was a sandcastle, about to crumble. Mason watched her silently, hesitantly. "Victoria, there's more." He pulled a voice recording from the envelope. Richard was speaking to someone, his voice trembling and tired. "If anything happens to me, tell the truth. Victoria isn't who you think she is." The recording ended with a dry crack, followed by absolute silence. Victoria's gaze drifted to the horizon. The city continued to lively, oblivious to the silent collapse of its queen. But inside her, something was beginning to break. For the first time in years, she felt fear, the kind of fear that neither money nor lawyers nor power can erase, the fear of the truth. That night, she locked the will in the safe and had new cameras installed throughout the penthouse. Each lens pointed at a door, a window, an exit. Paranoia had become her new luxury. The danger, she thought, doesn't come from outside. It sleeps inside the house. And as the clock struck midnight, a sound echoed from the hall, a metallic click, like the unlocking of a lock. Victoria looked at the front door. No movement, no sound, only her own reflection, and something behind it that seemed to be moving. The sun was rising over Miami, but the light felt cold inside Victoria's penthouse. The curtains were drawn, the coffee untouched. She spent her mornings reviewing contracts that no longer made sense, with each signature via ghosts. Richard's name seemed hidden in every clause, in every code. Newspapers began to question her absence. "Has the Queen of Miami disappeared?" the headlines proclaimed. She wasn't answering calls, she wasn't giving interviews. The few people who still saw her swore that her eyes no longer held any sparkle, only calculation. Attorney Mason was trying to calm her down. "We can control this, Victoria. We just need time." She replied without looking at him, "Time is the only luxury that even I cannot buy." And he went back to flipping through the papers, searching for a way out that no longer existed. Meanwhile, in the darkness of the rival offices, former partners were plotting. Hale and Marlowe was vulnerable. Forged documents began circulating, evidence that no one knew where it came from. But it all pointed to Victoria. Deep down, she knew. It was something that came from within. Someone nearby was fueling the storm, and like any empire built on silence, hers was beginning to speak too much. One night, while checking the safe, he noticed something was missing. The red pen drive had disappeared. The sound of her heart quickened like a broken clock. Tick-tack. Ruin was drawing near. "Who was here?" he shouted to the security guard. No answer. The cameras showed interference, static lines, blurred faces. On the screen for a moment, a figure appeared, too familiar to be a coincidence. Mason rushed in. "Victoria, we have a problem." She looked up. "One. I've lost count." He placed on the table an envelope identical to the first one, black, with no return address. Inside, a recent photo, Victoria talking to a politician under investigation for money laundering. The image was real, but the context was manipulated. "They are constructing a narrative," Mason said. "They want to destroy you before you can defend yourself." She laughed. An empty laugh, the laugh of someone who has already overcome fear. "Do they think they can bury me alive? They don't know that I was the one who taught them how to dig." But deep down, she knew. Control was slipping through her fingers. Outside, the winds were changing. A former employee named Daniel Green started posting videos, reports, recordings, old stories. Everything gained traction on social media. Victoria watched in silence, a glass in her hand. Each video was a precise strike. Each comment is a reminder that fortune cannot buy reputation. She tried to contact Daniel, offering him money. He refused. "What you've destroyed, no amount of money can repair." And he hung up, leaving a silence heavier than any insult. That same night, a black car parked in front of the penthouse. Two men got off the bus, left a briefcase at the reception desk, and disappeared. The security guard, frightened, took her to Victoria. Inside the folder, copies of contracts, invoices, and something unexpected. A death certificate for Richard Marlowe, dated 2 weeks before of the official date. "They faked everything," he murmured. "Or maybe I never even knew the man I buried." Paranoia has become routine. Victoria began to distrust everyone, employees, lawyers, even mirrors. He ordered the cameras to be destroyed and new ones installed with 24-hour surveillance. The walls seemed to whisper at night. The wind tapped against the windows like fingers begging to come in. "Are you listening?" he asked the void. No answer. Only the distant sound of the waves. Mason insisted that she stay away from Miami. Go to Geneva. Start over. But Victoria didn't run away. Running away is admitting guilt, and I don't admit anything. Her gaze was a mixture of pride and restrained madness. The following week, an emergency meeting was scheduled. Investors, partners, and lawyers all gathered around the same crystal table. Victoria entered with the poise of a queen, but inside she was trembling. One of the investors held up a document. "This contract, signed by you, redirects $400 million to illegal accounts. Would you like to explain, Ms. Hale?" She looked coldly at each face. "Explain it yourself if you can prove it." But the evidence was there, printed, stamped, irreversible. The meeting ended in silence. Victoria stepped out, her heels echoing like gunshots against the marble floor. I knew I had lost, I just didn't know how much yet. Hours later, he received an anonymous message on his cell phone. "Want to save what's left? Meet me at Pier 17, midnight." No name, no signature, just a promise of control. The clock read 11:45 p.m. when she arrived at the pier. Fog covered the harbour. The sound of the sea mingled with that of distant footsteps. A man emerged from the shadows, his hood covering his face. "You have what I want," he said, his voice hoarse. "And what would that be?" Victoria asked. "Your empire, or the rest of your soul?" The sound of a gunshot echoed in the bay. Seagulls flew away, alarmed. When the smoke cleared, the man had vanished, and Victoria alone was holding a new envelope. Inside, just one handwritten sentence: "Everything that is hidden one day comes to light." She closed her eyes and realized that for the first time she was no longer the hunter. That morning, lying on the cold floor of the office, Victoria understood that the real enemy had never been Richard nor Daniel. It was the reflection in the mirror, the face she no longer recognized. The invitation read, "Gala Dinner, Hale Foundation, benefiting the reconstruction of the bay." But everyone knew it wasn't charity, it was strategy. Victoria needed to show power, even if her soul was in ruins. The ballroom of the Grand Orchid Hotel shone in golden hues. Champagne was served, cameras flashed, and fake smiles multiplied. She descended the main staircase dressed in white, ironic for someone who lived surrounded by guilt. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said into the microphone in a calm voice. "Today we celebrate the future." But inside, each word sounded like a farewell. Among the guests, Daniel Green watched in silence. A few meters away, Lawyer Mason was exchanging tense glances with a journalist. Something big was about to happen, and she had no idea how big the storm would be. The dinner continued with extravagant luxury: violins, crystal, rehearsed laughter. Victoria appeared unharmed, but her gaze scanned the room like a survival radar. "Someone here wants to destroy me," he thought, and is smiling now. When the clock struck 9:30, the lights went out for a few seconds. A projector turned on, projecting images onto the main wall, and then the party was over. The video began with the voice of Richard Marlowe. "If anything happens to me, seek the truth. It's in the hands of the one I loved most, and who betrayed me the most." Soon after, recordings, contracts, and Victoria's face appeared. The room fell into absolute silence. The guests exchanged shocked glances. The sound of a glass falling echoed like a gunshot. Victoria remained motionless. Her face was pale, but her gaze still proud. "A setup," he murmured, his lips almost motionless. "A cheap setup." But Daniel's voice broke the silence. "No, Victoria, it's justice." He was holding a USB drive identical to the one that had gone missing, and in that instant she understood. Mason was the traitor. "You?" she asked, incredulous. "I tried to protect you," he replied, "but you never wanted to be saved." The camera flashes began to pop up like fireworks. The press stormed the hall. Reporters shouted, microphones appeared, security guards pushed through the crowd. And in the midst of the chaos, Victoria raised her chin, like a queen before the guillotine. "Do you think you can judge me?" she shouted. "I created this city. I bought every silence, every smile, every soul." But her voice no longer held sway. Now it was an echo of despair. The police arrived minutes later. 2 agents approached slowly, without haste, as if they had been expecting that moment. "Victoria Hale is in jail for fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." The flashes captured the exact moment when the gold diamond bracelet he was replaced with silver handcuffs, the perfect symbol of an empire built on luxury and guilt. The audience applauded, but the sound was strange, a mixture of shock and pleasure. That was the price of the show. And even humiliated, she still held on to what remained, artificial dignity. While being driven, she passed by Daniel. "You didn't win," he whispered. "You just unleashed a different kind of monster." He looked away, unable to answer. Outside, the evening wind stirred the palm trees. Sirens cut through the silence and the reflection of the red lights. He painted her face with shades of guilt and gold. "But behind the gold," murmured the narrator, "there are ashes that the wind never carries away." The city slept, but the name Hale was already making headlines. Her handcuffed photo circulated across the country on the front page of newspapers. From throne to prison, the fall of the Queen of Miami. And for the first time, Victoria saw what she had always feared, her own powerless face. As she was being carried away, she turned her gaze towards the horizon. The bay shimmered, indifferent. There, where it all began, his empire burned in silence. Inside the police car, she rested her head against the cold glass. The distant sound of the waves mingled with the metallic clang of the handcuffs, and for the first time she cried. But the tears were not of regret, they were of loss, because what hurt wasn't the prison. It was the fact that money could no longer save her. The news spread like wildfire. Victoria Hale arrested at $1 million gala. The newspapers didn't hold back on headlines, and the channels replayed the scandal video on a loop. The empire she had built with surgical precision was now crumbling before millions of eyes. Hale and Marlowe's shares plummeted within hours. Investors demanded answers, but the partners hid. The name Hale, once synonymous with power, was now a symbol of fraud and blind ambition. Miami seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if the city had been waiting for this drop. The former allies have disappeared, invitations disappeared, phone calls stopped. The most feared woman in Florida had become an unwanted ghost. In the world of the rich, forgetting is faster than forgiveness. Meanwhile, Victoria was taken to a temporary cell. The white walls reflected the cold light of dawn. She observed her hands, still marked by the rings she no longer wore. There, luxury seemed like a distant, almost absurd memory. Outside, journalists crowded around, microphones, cameras, drones flying over the building. Everyone wanted a statement, a look, a gesture. But Victoria said nothing. Silence was her last weapon. In court, the lawyers were trying to build an impossible defense. Fraud, money laundering, bribery. Each accusation was an open wound. The judge read the documents in a neutral voice while she maintained her composure. It was as if he were still in his glass office. Mason Clark, the treacherous lawyer, disappeared after the scandal. Rumors said he had fled the country. Others said he had been silenced. Victoria knew he would never be able to bear the guilt. "The weak do not survive power," she once murmured, alone in her cell. With each hearing, new secrets emerged. Fake accounts, hidden contracts, compromising recordings. It was like watching one's own empire turn into a minefield. Everything she tried to hide now cried out for justice. The media made a spectacle of his downfall. Talk shows discussed his coldness. Newspapers scrutinized his clothes and gestures. How could someone so intelligent have fallen so low? They asked. But no one knew what it was like to live trapped in one's own reflection. On the abandoned rooftop, workers were removing furniture and paintings. The valuable paintings were now going up for auction. The safe had been opened by the police. Inside, only ashes and a melted necklace. The symbol of the empire burned along with the truth. Daniel Green received public recognition for exposing the crimes. But deep down, he wasn't celebrating. I knew I had destroyed someone who was already broken inside. Justice sometimes doesn't save. It merely finishes what the ego started. The symbolic funeral of the Hale Foundation was broadcast on TV. Businessmen and politicians feigned sadness, dressed in black. But behind the fake tears, there was relief. The throne was vacant, and power, once again, for sale. In prison, Victoria kept her gaze fixed on the ceiling. Time had ceased to exist. She remembered the dinners, the laughter, the promises. Everything seemed like a distant film, projected onto a screen of dust. A young reporter managed to visit her. "Do you regret it?" he asked hesitantly. Victoria smiled calmly. "Regret is a luxury I've chosen not to afford." The phrase made headlines the next day. The cold queen of Miami speaks. Weeks turned into months. Arrests became routine, and the name Hale slowly faded from the headlines. But the memories remained alive in the city. Each building, each avenue still bore his initials. The loyal employees tried to preserve what remained: a foundation, a smaller property, a name on a plaque. But without Victoria, everything lost its meaning. She was the empire. And now she was dust. On quiet nights, the guards swore they heard music coming from their cell, a light, melancholic sound of a distant piano. "It's Mrs. Hale," they said. "She plays what's left of her own soul." But nobody knew if it was true or just collective guilt. The prosecutor proposed a deal, partial confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victoria refused. "I don't negotiate with those who have never understood the price of power." The sentence was sealed, 15 years. During the final trial, she was wearing white again. He looked at the audience and recognized familiar faces. Rivals, reporters, traitors. And in the midst of them, Daniel. Their eyes met for an instant and time stood still. "Arrogance," said the judge, "is the foundation of every downfall." Victoria kept her chin up, but the tears came. Not out of regret, but out of wounded pride. The verdict echoed like a prophecy fulfilled. Outside, the crowd applauded, some for justice, others for pleasure. Few understood that the story didn't end there. Thus began a legend about the price of greed. It rained heavily that night in Miami. The lights reflected off the streets like liquid gold, and on the horizon, the old Hale and Marlowe building. It still shone, empty, silent, cursed. At the top of the tower, a window remained lit. They said he was the new owner. Others said that nobody dared to live there, but some swore they saw a female silhouette looking out at the bay, and the golden glow on her neck. It seemed familiar. Victoria's cell did not have ordinary bars. It was a white room, too clean, too cold. The sheets were pure cotton, the pillow immaculate. Everything there seemed expensive, and yet nothing was worth anything. In the silence of the early morning, she heard the sound of keys. Each metallic click reminded him of the safes he once opened with pride. Now she was the one living locked inside, a prisoner of her own memories. The real prison was invisible, made of memories and regrets. On a shelf, the guards had left an old newspaper. On the cover, her own photo, handcuffed and defiant. She ran her fingers over the image, as if touching a lost life. "The world loves to destroy what it once applauded," he murmured. The days passed by the same way. Coffee at 6, inspection at 8, silence at 9. Victoria maintained the same ritual: stand up, comb her hair, strike a pose. It was her way of saying that, even broken, she still controlled something, her appearance. Sometimes I dreamed of the Miami sea. I could smell the salt, feel the wind blowing through my hair. But upon waking, all he saw were the white, impassive walls. It was like living inside a mirror that no longer reflected anyone. The head guard treated her with respect, almost reverence. "Hale, I never thought I'd see you here," he said one day. She replied sarcastically, "Neither do I, but life loves expensive ironies." And he turned his gaze to the ceiling, as if observing destiny from above. One night, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone had left a small box by the cell door. Inside, a gold necklace, the same one she was wearing on the night of the fire. No ticket, no explanation, just the gold and the silence. Victoria held him for minutes without emotion. Then he put it back in the box and pushed it into the corner. "Some jewels," she said softly, "weigh more than chains." And he lay down, staring at the shadow that danced on the wall. The lights went out, leaving only the pale glow of the moon. For a moment she smiled, not the smile of someone who has won, but of someone who finally understands the price of war. Greed, he thought, doesn't destroy the weak, it destroys the invincible. In the following days, he began to write, short phrases, fragments of memories, lessons disguised as confessions. He called that notebook "The Truths That Gold Can't Buy." It was his last attempt to leave a different legacy. The jailer read one of the pages and remained silent. "You write like someone who still believes in redemption." She replied, "I don't believe in redemption, but I do believe in memory." And he began to write again, word by word, like someone rebuilding ruins. The weeks passed. The sparkle in Victoria's eyes began to fade. It wasn't sadness nor guilt. It was emptiness. She had given everything to power, and power took what was left of her. One day, he received an anonymous letter. "They are selling the last building with his name on it. The money will be used for social projects." Victoria smiled. "Finally, something useful that I destroyed." The nights became too long. The distant sound of rain was his only comfort. Sometimes he would pretend to be in his old penthouse listening to the sea, but what I was actually hearing was the echo of my own regret. On the last page of the notebook, he wrote a simple sentence: "I possessed the world, but I never possessed myself." She closed her diary, took a deep breath and looked at the ceiling. For the first time, he seemed at peace with the emptiness. The narrator concludes in a low tone, "Luxury can imprison more than any cell, and sometimes the brightest walls hide the darkest souls." The metallic sound of the door echoed. Her story seemed to finally be coming to an end. It was late afternoon when the jailer handed over an old envelope. The red seal, the same one used on Richard Marlowe's contracts. Victoria recognized her immediately. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from memory. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "It arrived without a sender," he replied. Inside there was only a yellowed letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Richard's. "If you're reading this," he said, "then you finally understand the price of what we did. I loved you, Victoria, but I loved even more the power I saw in you, and it devoured us." She read in silence, her gaze fixed on the words that seemed to bleed. Richard confessed to having planned his own death, faking infidelity to expose her. "I wanted to destroy you, but I ended up setting you free," the ending said. The last line, "Gold doesn't burn, it only shows what's left of the ashes." Victoria dropped the paper and laughed to herself. A gentle laugh, somewhere between madness and lucidity. The circle was complete. The initial fire was no accident, but the final act of a man who knew his weakness, greed. Outside, the sky was darkening. She walked to the cell window and watched the sunset paint everything golden. The reflection of the light was reminiscent of the flames from that morning, the fire that consumed his mansion, and with it, everything he believed he possessed. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. At that moment, there was no anger, no fear, only acceptance. The empire burned, but the truth remained, and for the first time, Victoria Hale understood what peace was. The following morning, the guards found the cell empty. On the bed, the gold necklace and the diary open to the last page. The words, written in soft ink. "Every empire falls, but some fall silently." And the Florida sun streamed in through the window, illuminating the ashes of the past. In the bay, fishermen swore they saw a solitary silhouette on the water. They said he seemed to smile, observing the city he once ruled. No one could say whether it was an illusion, a ghost, or a memory. But the name Hale was once again whispered like a legend, a warning. The narrator concludes in a low, firm voice. She believed she could possess the world, but the world possessed her. And when the fire had finished its work, all that remained was what had always been there. The shadow of a fortune, and the price of greed. The Hale case has become a subject of study, a documentary, and a warning. Business schools cited his name as an example of both success and ruin. Some saw her as a villain, others as a victim of her own ambition. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one emerges unscathed from absolute power. The Miami mansion was demolished months later. In its place, a public garden was erected, with a discreet plaque. Here flourished the lessons that gold did not teach. The sea became calm again, as if the city had finally exhaled forgiveness. Victoria's diary was published anonymously. Readers around the world recognized a mirror in his words. "We all have a price," one of the pages said, "but few know when to stop." The work has become a dark classic about the human soul and the weight of greed. And so, the name Hale ceased to be merely a scandal. It became a warning, an eternal reminder that fortune can shine brighter than the sun. But it always leaves a shadow. Gold is beautiful but blinding, and those who worship it too much end up being devoured by it. Every fortune hides a secret, and Victoria Hale's was just one among thousands. How many stories of power, betrayal, and ruin still lie dormant behind vaults and contracts? In the end, greed builds empires, but it is the truth that sets them ablaze. If you also believe that all luxury comes at a price, sign up for Hidden Fortunes and continue discovering the secrets behind wealth. Like this video, share it with anyone who loves true mysteries, and remember, the next empire to fall might be the one no one expects.